Are we ready to get started? Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon now. Welcome to the first session of the Flower Expo. How's everybody doing today? Good? All right. Well, thanks for joining us this morning. We have a illustrious panel here today, and we're going to cover and talk about the evolving trends in the cannabis industry, and there are many here in Massachusetts and certainly across the country. So we're going to dive into a number of these topics. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Harrison Wise. I am the founder and CEO of Wise Collective. We are a marketing consultancy that specializes in technology and cannabis marketing and communications. I've been doing cannabis marketing and communications for about 10 years and technology for 17 of those years, 17 years. And I'm also the founder, publisher, and occasional contributor to the Bluntness, a content platform that helps consumers navigate and understand the complexities of the cannabis industry and psychedelics through the voices and opinions and perspectives of folks who are on the front lines of the industry, like our illustrious panel here. So without any further ado, I'll ask our panelists here to introduce themselves. We'll start at the end there with Matt.
Hi, how's it going, everyone? I'm Matt Davidson. I'm the Vice President of Retail at Native Sun. Got locations across Eastern Massachusetts. I am a cannabis and retail lifer. Been in retail since I was 14 years old and cannabis since I was 21 and a day. So very happy to be here today and chatting about retail and everything going on in the industry.
Nice. Hi, everyone. Megan Dobro, founder and CEO of SafeTiva Labs, a testing lab in Westfield, Mass. I'm a molecular biologist. I was on the faculty at Hampshire College teaching undergrads biology before this, and got my PhD in molecular biology at Caltech, and really saw a space for me in cannabis, especially with the microbial testing and the technology that I could bring to the table there and keep turnaround times super low. So yeah, all things testing and science.
Hey everybody, I'm Judson Hill. I'm the president of the Georgia market for Fine Fettle. So obviously we're vertically integrated here in Mass and also in Connecticut. We have one of the 6 licenses in Georgia. I'm originally from Atlanta, but been working in the industry for the past decade out in California on the brand side back in the early medical days there. And then I moved over to work in technology and also finance, fundraising, for a few operators and starting a lending firm specific to cannabis companies. We financed about $1 billion in transactions across the country over the past 5 years. And then I moved over to more of the fundraising before joining the Fine Fettle team earlier this year to take us to market as we're opening 5 dispensaries and we're vertically integrated in Georgia.
Hi guys, my name is Charmaine Chua. I am the Region Vice President of Sales for Curaleaf in the Northeast region. I've been in the space now for about 5 years. I started my career out in Los Angeles, where I was the SVP of sales for a brand called Steezy out there, where I actually had a chance to work with Harrison quite a bit back in my old Steezy days. And before I joined Curaleaf, I was actually running around here in Massachusetts because I was actually the VP of sales at PAX before I joined Curaleaf.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. So let's just jump right in. What is a current trend happening in the cannabis industry that most impacts your day-to-day work? Since you have the microphone, Charmaine.
Let's see. I think for me, besides more states going legal or with descheduling, hopefully in the mix here, the thing I think that maybe keeps me up at night is this race to the bottom with pricing. It's messing us all up, right? So that screws me over a bit.
I would say the biggest issue for us down in Georgia and that I see across the country is the hemp market, which I don't have any issue with hemp. I think it's actually an interesting opportunity, but for us in the South, you can sell basically THCA or cannabis, whatever you want to call it, at all the smoke shops. And I saw Massachusetts just recently actually issued a statement that they're not allowing that, which I think a lot of the states are starting to do. Also, there's the new farm bill where they've talked about essentially shutting that whole market down. So I think that's just a very interesting either opportunity or competition, depending on how you look at it.
We've been seeing a lot of clients who have been trying to skirt around the testing rules for a long time. And so the trend now is that regulators are starting to pay attention, and I think they're going to start cracking down. They are having a lot more oversight, and I think that's a trend in the right direction.
I think at its most acute level here in Massachusetts, what we're really seeing is a shift across almost every company towards pragmatism, because we all came into this space 7, 8, 10 years ago with so much of an idea of what it could turn into, and we've now seen it develop in more mature markets. We're feeling it develop here, and I think we're all still looking at the future, but we're now looking at the future in the context of like, how can we get to the future realistically, and what's actually at hand in this space here?
So Megan, this next question is for you. We're going to jump into some of the regulatory changes that are happening here in Massachusetts. How have some of these changes shaped the cannabis industry, and how should companies adapt to remain compliant while seeking growth opportunities?
Great. Can I first take a poll, and can you raise your hand if you're in the Massachusetts market? Okay. And are you all aware of the testing changes that happened in April, that the CCC changed how we do our calculations and we're no longer moisture correcting? I see a lot of nodding. Okay, great. So I'm finding that on the production side, people understand that, and the bulletin has made its way. Hopefully your testing lab has done a good job of explaining to you what the changes were and how that's going to impact you. As I talk to retailers and consumers, I'm finding that they have no idea that that happened. And so just as a quick recap, testing labs were receiving flour, weighing it on a scale, and then they would bake it in an oven, and then they would weigh it again. And the difference in the weight they would attribute to the moisture loss. And they were calling that percentage moisture content. And then they were subtracting that sample weight from the final weight as they were reporting cannabinoids. And that had the effect of inflating potency. And I don't have an opinion about whether we should be doing moisture correction or not. I just want us all to be doing the same thing. But some labs were using very high heat ovens. Most labs were using high heat ovens to do that. And so if you ever saw your moisture above 10%, it was probably the oven was way too hot, because it should have been around 6 to 8%. And so what was happening was labs were baking off terpenes, CO2, any volatile compounds were getting baked off, contributing to that weight and further inflating potency. So that has stopped. So we're going to see numbers across the board go down between 1 and 5%, depending on what method the lab was using. The other change they made is that they finally gave us a calculation for what total THC actually means, so we're all using the same thing. And all of the acidic forms of THC, such as THCA, now have to have a 0.877 correction to account for decarboxylation. So that brings it down by 13%. And some labs weren't doing that. There were 3 labs I know of at least who were not doing that previously. They're going to see numbers go down another 2 to 5%. So we're seeing numbers across the board go down up to 10%, depending on what lab you were using previously. But it's the exact same flower. And so no one should be lowering prices. Everyone should have a moisture calculator so that you can wrap your mind around, what does this number mean in the pre-CCC bulletin days, and then price it for that number, not the number that you're seeing now on the label. So all the labels went down, but it's the exact same product. And as we're talking about the pricing issue and the race to the bottom, it's really important that we hold steady. I don't want to get in dangerous price fixing territory here, but I want everyone to understand that it's the same stuff, and especially for out-of-town consumers coming into Massachusetts over the borders, they're comparing to their state's numbers. And so we just need a lot of education of bud tenders and consumers and those who are setting the prices at the retail level, that it's the same stuff, but the numbers are going down, and they're not going down evenly across the board because all the labs were doing it differently. So it's tricky, and everyone should be in touch with their lab to understand how they expect the numbers to change. and really think about the market trend over time and what this means for us in Massachusetts. It's a really big change, and I don't think nearly enough people are talking about it. I don't think there has been nearly enough education about it, and it impacts us in really big ways. That 27%er might now be under 20%, and think about how much that price difference is on retail shelves. It's huge.
Do you foresee, Megan, let's stay on this topic for a second. Do you foresee a universal standard with rescheduling happening? Do you see that?
I think as we get toward more federal descheduling or universal playing field, that there will be more national-wide standards that labs have to meet. I still think for a very long time, states are going to have their own testing rules and they're going to have their own differences. But labs are going to have to adhere to ISO 17025, and they're going to have to be compliant at a federal level, which is going to take a lot of labs out that are currently not following that. But look at what other states are doing across the country and how those are changing, and just keep in mind that Massachusetts is typically 8 to 18 months behind our states in the West, and so we can predict how things are going to change. And as I said, regulators are really going to be paying attention. The labs are getting a lot more inspections, and they're asking a lot more questions. And sorry, I know I'm taking a lot of time, but one more thing is. There was recently a fine for a producer of $200,000 because they were cherry picking their lab samples. And so that's something that I know from being in client facilities, that most people are not following what the guidance says for how you should be doing your sampling. It's supposed to be on camera and it's supposed to be random. We have 253 here who is spectacular at doing that. Jordan always does it right. And I think companies like that who have always been doing it right are going to be the gold standard, while other companies who weren't following that and were cherry picking are going to have a harder time because the CCC is going to start asking for that camera footage of when you did your sampling. So that's kind of scary for a lot of us.
Thanks, Megan. So we have a new member to our party here, Randy Reed. So Randy, we'll let you jump in with a quick intro, and then you could answer the question about how recent changes in market-specific regulations and or rescheduling have shaped the cannabis industry, and how should companies adapt to remain compliant and while seeking growth opportunities. So jump right in, man. You're in the hot seat.
All right, I'm on the hot seat. I'm Randy Reed. I'm with Active. We are a hardware manufacturer. We come from the industry. We're for the industry. We make cannabis hardware for cannabis folks. I've spent the past 20 years in the industry, 10 years on the rec side, 10 years on the medical side, and I'm a cannabis scientist, and I'm the VP Science at Active. To dive right in, it's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time out in Mass, and it's been great getting to meet everybody and get a lay of the land, so apologize for my tardiness. But it's cannabis, hey, I made it.
We're used to it.
Yeah. So anyways, not to hog the mic here, to talk about downscheduling and my take on it. In my role at Active, we work very closely with, I'm a member of the ASTM D37 committee, so an industry standards organization. What we're trying to do, we just launched Vape Safer, which is an industry advocacy group for cannabis vape. We have PACs in it, True Terpenes, Abstracts, ourselves, we're founding members, Active, Blink Group, and we have some of our other competitors in the vape space as well. And we're all advocating for the growth of cannabis vape and sensible regulation. And obviously with Schedule 3 coming down, it's big news for us. We're really just trying to pave a pathway that's science-based to regulate cannabis vape sensibly and not like what happened in e-cig. We are not e-cig, we're very different. The devices might look the same, the user experiences might look the same to the layperson or the outsider, but we all know that we use these devices differently than how we use our e-cig and tobacco devices. So we're really trying to demonstrate the differences and make a case for specific regulation that can just ensure the continued growth of our sector. Because it is, I mean, I love my vape. I like smoking flower too, it's my go-to, but you can't ignore the way that the industry kind of chooses their products and how it's starting to play out in that sense. So we just want to make sure that, once that Schedule 3 or whatever it is comes, it's coming, that we're regulated by, we're advocating for the TTB to regulate us versus the FDA. Of course, if it's medical, then the FDA makes a lot of sense, but it's not going to be a one regulator kind of solution. We feel that there's going to be a lot of interplay between the various regulatory bodies, and we are at the tip of the spear for that and advocating for our industry. So while I have the mic, I just want to say one thing. I'm doing a puff topography study. I'll be in the smoking section. It is the largest puff topography study in cannabis. And come be a part of it. What we're doing with the information is we're proving that the nicotine industry standards for puff topography, so when the researchers go into a laboratory and they test devices on a machine, or like in Colorado where you have to generate aerosol emissions for testing, not just test the liquid or the oil, they want to test a consumable product, which is the standard in the nicotine industry, that they're using a method that's based on evidence and not just something that's pulled from the nicotine art. So this is really important for us to just grow the science, to harmonize all of the data, and really put our best case forward, that we are different and that we should be treated differently. So yeah, please come get high for science. Come see me. I'll be in the smoking session.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy. So Judson, you have a unique perspective on the industry because you've kind of been across a lot of different parts of the industry. So what's your take on the regulatory environment and how to stay competitive and seek growth opportunities in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest potential change with the rescheduling, I mean, kind of looking at it from two ways. Currently, being the president of Fettle and a medical state, kind of the implications that has from a medical point of view, and then also historically, I've worked more on the finance and fundraising side, where I think the biggest benefit in the immediate is the potential removal of the 280E tax implication, and that immediately would make companies much more profitable overnight, and also make it easier to fundraise or access, cheaper capital, because at the end of the day, I had a lending firm where we specifically financed cannabis transactions originally out of California, and then we worked in about 14 states, including Massachusetts, so pretty familiar here. And as most people know, the cost of capital is pretty expensive in cannabis, and that's because obviously there's a high risk. So I think this would naturally make cheaper capital available and also make the companies look more appealing from a financial point of view, with the caveat that obviously that's not happening overnight. So I know there's some people like Curaleaf, for example, that have started to take the lead on how taxes could look without 280E, which will be an interesting guinea pig there. But I would recommend anyone that's fundraising or an operator to kind of model out how your financials would look without 280E. And if you are looking to fundraise, kind of presenting it in that point of view to potential investors, because obviously it's much more appealing. Most people in the cannabis industry, effective tax rate can be 60+%, or if you're in any other industry, you're trying to work down to zero. And then when the cost of capital is 20+%, like, how are you supposed to make any money? So it's pretty game-changing there. And then on the medical side, in Georgia, we're a highly limited medical market. You have to get a recommendation from a doctor. The conditions are very specific and somewhat severe at this point in time. So I think the implications of being able to do more medical research, and just when we need doctors basically sign off that cannabis is medicine, the rescheduling is admitting that cannabis does have medical benefits, and also will allow a lot more research to come out, which is really what's going to move the needle from the medical point of view. So I'd say those are the two biggest changes that I see coming down the line.
Matt, Charmaine, do you guys have anything to add? Not on this topic. Let's talk consumer preferences, which seem to be fleeting from one month to the next, one year to the next. How have consumer preferences changed in the last few years as legalization has spread, and how does that impact the development of products and innovation in this category in cannabis? Sure. Yeah, go for it.
So what I'm about to say is just my observation. This is in fact, y'all check it out yourself. Okay, so what am I seeing? Beverages went crazy during 420 this year. Hemp is obviously doing its thing, and it's in every C-store, tobacco shop, so take with it what you will. I'm also seeing, obviously, the explosion of disposable vape, and particularly in live resin and rosin. Trim and shake, while still a small percentage of the business, is really ticking up to grab my attention. And pre-rolls. Pre-rolls are obviously continuing to explode. That's what I'm seeing.
Do you mean trim and shake as in like smokable trim and shake?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think really indicative of what Charmaine's saying is that we've seen a huge stratification in consumer preference where it's gone in one of two directions, and we have consumers who are passionate about this and care about what they're smoking and what is in this plant, and we have consumers who are seeing this as another expense in their household with groceries and tobacco and toiletries and all the other things. So now every brand who's trying to make it work is facing this question of how do I hit the high end and the low end without getting this middle child syndrome of being a brand that's lost in the mix. And I think that's super indicative when at the same time we're seeing rosin and solventless products and trim and shake at the top of these lists because we're hitting both ends of extreme and the middle is what's going away quickly.
I'll just add that I'm seeing more consumer demand for transparency about what's in their products. And there's a new certified remediation free program that's certifying that product doesn't have, that it wasn't remediated, and there will be symbols on the packaging. And I'm seeing more things like that where it's coming from consumers who are demanding to know what's in their product. So, yeah.
Cool, thanks. And how are advances in formulation and delivery methods driving new product innovations? This might be a question for Randy. And what can companies do to stay ahead of these trends?
Well, like I said earlier, we make cannabis vapes for cannabis operators and manufacturers and cannabis peeps. We are cannabis peeps. So we work very closely with our formulators, our oil makers, our extractors. The technology is, it's advancing quickly. The solventless and rosin vapes, or whatever you want to call them, we're in ASTM, we're trying to standardize solventless as the term, but there's a little bit of pushback within the community on solventless because you've got people that are like, oh, water's a solvent and all these things and whatever. We're just trying to standardize something so that we all are speaking the same language to the point of transparency, and we're communicating some of the virtues of the product effectively. So anyways, formulation is huge. I spend a ton of time working with our partners on characterizing viscosity, right? Centipoise. Is that oil thick, thin? How do you do it? Are you using quantitative measures? Are you using qualitative measures? What does that look like? Can I show you some of the tips and techniques that we do to be able to characterize viscosity? Because in a vape pen, it's huge. It's one of the primary levers you can pull towards reliability, performance, flavor, like making sure that viscosity is on point. Not too thick, not too thin. There's a Goldilocks zone. So understanding that is huge. And there's many ways to do that on the formulation side. And then on our end, we have lots of levers we can pull to. We can make the cores tighter. We can make them more porous. We can change the pathways within the ceramic structures. We can change the aperture sizes. We can change the architecture. We can do this very quickly to dial in the hardware to the oil maker, because a lot of times the oil makers, they spend so much time working on their formula that they want to keep it that way. And they don't want to have to adjust it for a new hardware, right? So we really try to understand where they are and their wanting and willingness to kind of tune their process to the hardware. If they're like, nope, I want to keep it like this is what I've been doing for forever, it works here, I'm always like, it might work in this hardware, but just because it's 510 doesn't mean it's the same, and that same formulation is going to work in this 510 hardware. They're very different. We produce our products very specifically for cannabis oil rheology, for solventless rheology, for liquid live resin, for liquid diamonds, right? For distillate. Like, there are very specific ways that the products are made based on the formulation. So it's huge. One thing that I just want to leave everybody with, if you're on the oil making side, is work on your characterization. Understand what the metrics are and where the levers are to pull. Viscosity is one of them, terp content, cannabinoid content, lipid content. We have a paper coming out where we've identified, this is in combination with abstracts. Sorry, I'm going way over. But anyways, cannabis lipids, they wreak havoc on cores. So your rosin pens and things that are more, I hate to say it, don't hate me, crude extracts, they're not refined, they're distilled, which is what we love about them, but they can carry over more plant waxes, fats, lipids. We've been able to characterize and identify these lipid structures. The paper's getting drafted up now and it's going to be published. I'm a co-author on it with Abstracts Tech. But we've identified the lipid structures that the cannabis plant makes. They're C15, C18 molecules, very simple hydrocarbon lipids. But these things, as you vape through the product, they get gunky, as you can imagine. Even if you're dabbing, right, like you see the kind of residual, even your 6-star is going to have a little residual if you put it under a microscope and you look at what's left behind, right? These are these lipid structures. But from a formulation perspective, there's a very simple benchtop test that we've developed. It's a winterization test, 10-to-1 dilution ethanol to 1 gram of whatever product it is, shake it up, dilute it, throw it in the freezer, look at what crashes out. You'll notice that even the same cultivar will produce different concentrations of lipids, especially if it's outdoor and you've got variability, seasonality. Even indoor, we see that variation. So if it has a lot of these lipids, you just want to be mindful about your formulation. You want to try to increase the viscosity to get that product, decrease the viscosity to get that product flow a little bit better, because there is an impact on viscosity in rheology, and that's ultimately one of the big levers when you're formulating for vape. So do what you can to characterize, come see us, we're happy to share the methods that we've developed, and you'll be well on your way.
Cool, thanks Randy. Judson, do you have anything to add on the advances in formulation and delivery methods driving new product innovations?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not my expertise particularly, but interesting point of view. I mean, coming from working in California and then some of the East Coast markets like Massachusetts and now in Georgia, where it's highly medical, we can't sell flower or even vape. So it's more looking at cannabis as an ingredient. We basically have a 50,000 square foot cultivation. I've never been a part of a harvest where you don't get any flour out of that. So we process all of that into oil, and then we take it one step further and turn it into a nano powder. So it is pretty cool where basically all of our flour then is, an ingredient that has a shelf life for a couple of years. Obviously our goal is to sell through it much quicker than that, but then you can make any product you want, from tinctures and topicals to we're doing cool things like more drink additives. So yeah, I think it's interesting where I'm a flower smoker, and I think flower will always be there. But over the course of time, I see it more just cannabis turning into an ingredient to be put into different products. And considering we're forced to do that, that's kind of the point of view that I'm looking at it right now.
Charmaine, do you have anything to add? No? Let's talk about market segmentation. How are businesses balancing the demands of both recreational and medical markets as more states legalize? Judson, you have the mic.
Well, it's pretty interesting for Fine Fettle since we're in 3 markets, being Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Georgia, that are all at very different life stages and medical or recreational. So clearly here in Mass, it's much more mature rec market. We can, have our own brands. You can produce for other brands, what have you. Connecticut, we're a first mover, so we have about 25% of the market share on the retail side and are building out a cultivation. So there it's more, lack of flower in that market currently since it's a new rec market, super high demand. And then Georgia kind of being the furthest extreme to the other side, there's actually only 6 companies that have a license. We're all vertically integrated. We'll be the third to market. And I mean, our biggest issue right now is more just letting people know that there is a program and getting patients in it. I'm born and raised in Atlanta. People definitely smoke weed there, but they're finding it through different avenues currently because it's so early on. So we have to, more do a public campaign to let people know that there is a medical cannabis program, why they should buy that versus the hemp or just going to their traditional market source. And once we get patients, we'll be one of 3 groups up and running, fully vertically integrated, and it's a pretty great opportunity.
In markets that have both med and rec, do you feel like consumers understand the difference?
I mean, coming from California, I was a medical patient back in the day and involved early on. It was a bit different. From what I've seen in many states, it's mostly just a tax issue from the consumer point of view, where there's better pricing and cheaper taxes if you have your medical card. Connecticut, for us, is an example where it's a hybrid state that Fine Fettle is based in. I don't work specifically in Connecticut, but I believe the sales are like close to 90% rec and 10% medical. So I think quickly, as the state goes recreational, the medical market begins to dwindle. But that's what I've seen.
So I think particularly here, where we're 7 or 8 years past the first piece of this major change and 10 years past medical, we're starting to see the medical pie shrink, but we're also identifying what those previous medical consumers were, and they're at the top end of that customer stratification. They're the people shopping in high-ticket items for organic and natural products that are sourced from places that they're comfortable with and created by people that they trust. But I think we're seeing that medical slice really dwindle because people are finding that we've developed far enough that that consumer can be served in both places. So I think that's how we've seen it really change over the last 2-3 years here, a couple years post the transition.
So is the medical market here to stay, or is rec really going to continue to outshine?
If I knew that, I wouldn't be on this panel.
Randy, anybody anything to add to that topic? Or
I mean, from a device standpoint, we get like dosing control and those sorts of things is something that impacts us depending on what state we're in. So we have solutions for that. But yeah, not much more to add there.
I want to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, marketing. With strict regulations in every market and differing from one market to the next, what are some creative strategies that brands and retailers can employ to stand out and stay compliant?
I think this is something that we're all dealing with acutely, even as recently as moving targets and regulation that were announced last week. We've seen a huge series of enforcement bulletins that have changed this gray area and made it a lot thinner. So I think particularly over the last few weeks, 2 to 3 months, people are going in a much safer direction than we were for the last 2 or 3 years, as we've gotten framework and parameters for what we're allowed to do, but also that it's become a topic of conversation and a focus. Unfortunately, it's not super conducive to growing these companies and these brands, but it is evening the playing field, which is what we're looking for.
So I'm not a marketer, but I see things from obviously a sales perspective. Having had a chance to work with multiple states, I think for those of you who have been in a similar boat, some states are way more strict than others, especially around enforcement. And so for me at least, I don't know if I'd call it creative. I think I'm just trying to be efficient and compliant as possible. You start to kind of see which states have relatively similar rules, that Venn diagram, if you will, of what's prohibited and what's not. And instead of making, let's say you're in 10 states, instead of having to make 10 different versions of a single asset, you're probably making maybe 6 instead, which I know that may not sound like a big deal, but it is for us marketers and salespeople. God knows I don't want my team juggling 8 different versions of one file. And then I would also say just things that I don't know, catch my attention are, some states are really strict around language. There's one state, you can't say cannabis, you gotta say medical marijuana. Or you gotta, you also can't show photos of people consuming, right? So if you can know all those rules, and may I just say, find someone who is so detail-oriented and just thrives off of this kind of detail. Thank God at Curaleaf we have several of those, and they keep us safe, and we want to do the right thing. But I think enforcement is a big deal too, so y'all be careful. But just know that it is not ideal, but it's manageable if you can find the common denominators across the states. But tons of combinations, permutations, I might add.
I'm going to go out on a ledge and say that the marketing and just cannabis in general is overregulated, especially in the marketing realm. So I'll go on the record and say that. But as someone who ran an agency and works in the cannabis space from both the marketing and the media side, There are opportunities to market though, so don't continue to perpetuate that myth that cannabis can't advertise. There are means and ways to do it. To Charmaine's point, you just have to find the right partners and those that really understand sort of that middle ground that exists between the regulations and what's allowed. But there are ways. So there's definitely hope out there to get your brand and retail shops in front of the target consumers that you're trying to reach. Let's talk about anybody have anything to add on the marketing topic before we move on?
I know a great news show that they can work.
Yes, as well. Yes, there's plenty of media out there. Talking Joints Memo, Pro Cannabis Media. There's a bunch. Sensi Mag, the Bluntness. Let's talk about the investment climate with rescheduling on the horizon, potentially descheduling thereafter. How has that influenced the availability of capital for cannabis startups and established companies?
I mean, I talked about this a little bit before, but I think obviously the rescheduling is the biggest catalyst for cannabis investments in a long time. It had been pretty dark the past couple of years from a fundraising point of view. But then also there's just clearly a lot of companies now that are looking for capital, and most investors that are looking at the space know that that is the case. And so it just makes it very competitive when an investor can basically come through and cherry pick, what deal and what terms work for them. I think if I was fundraising right now, which fortunately I'm not, or I guess maybe I'd rather do it this year than I was last year when it was tougher, but it's really trying to capitalize on these positive momentums within the industry and potentially find investors that might not have exposure yet, because many of them that do have exposure to the industry have been burned, and that won't be helpful. I think the longer term benefit is that institutional capital, pension funds, things like that are starting to look at the industry more and more seriously, which then most likely would go into the venture capital firms themselves. So the past couple of years, most of the cannabis VCs basically were out of money. So they were either having to redeploy into their current portfolio companies to keep them alive, or they were really just kind of wasting people's time and prying for information to help out their existing portfolio companies. So I would be wary for that as well if you're fundraising, as a lot of them already kind of have their horses picked and they're really just gouging for information. So I think it is a better climate now with the changes, and I hope it will continue to be with this new capital coming in. But again, that is kind of a couple-year process of one, rescheduling actually going into effect, this more traditional institutional capital deploying into the venture capital firms, and then it kind of trickling down to the operators themselves.
Are there specific firms that specialize in cannabis, investing in cannabis, VC firms? I come from the tech world, so I know all the tech VCs, but are there sort of cannabis-specific VCs or family offices? Like where do people go to find funding for cannabis businesses?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I guess convenient. I mean, how I got involved in the industry originally was on the brand side in California, but then I worked closely with a VC out of LA called Casa Verde Capital, which I guess is famous as Snoop Dogg is a partner per se. They've invested in a lot of the ancillary businesses in the industry, so everything from the Dutchies and Leaflings and Metrics and Surfside. So I did help start two of their portfolio companies. I think they're a great group to work with. There's Delta Emerald, there's Key Investment Partners. So yes, there definitely are cannabis-specific VCs, and then even within that, they have specialties of some invest in plant-touching operators, where some are more ancillary focused. And then I think to your last point, family offices is really where the greatest source of capital in the industry to date has come from, because of the lack of institutional capital coming into the industry. And I mean, it's related to Fettle, where our founders actually have a family office out of Connecticut and were early investors in the space. And then as Connecticut went medical, went out and won and applied for those licenses. So I definitely think family office money is what has been powering the industry to date to a large degree.
Do you have recommendations for getting in front of those type of organizations for those looking for funding? Just best practices, some highlights.
Best practices. Well, like I said, I would recommend putting together a model that removes 280E as a optimistic outlook on what could happen to your business if you were to become more profitable. I'd say that's the best immediate recommendation. Otherwise, I mean, if anyone's fundraising, I'd be happy to connect you with a few of those groups that I mentioned. I mean, it's pretty easy. There's like 4 or 5 VCs within the space, and then the family office is a pretty unique network. So you really just need to get plugged in potentially with someone that, you know, raises capital as a business or an investment banking service if you aren't already connected within the family office network, because it's pretty, I don't know, private.
And would you recommend conferences like a Benzinga for this purpose? Is it kill multiple birds with one stone kind of?
I love Benzinga. I mean, I've been in the industry for almost 10 years. I like the conferences, you know, to see my friends and what have you. I don't know if you're going to go to Benzinga and find an investor that you didn't know before. I mean, obviously, everyone's going there kind of looking for capital. And like I said, the past few years, the VCs themselves are also looking for capital. So it's kind of just this joke of a dance of asking people for money, and the people that you're asking actually don't have any money themselves. But again, with the changes that I kind of mentioned before, hopefully that changes over the next couple of years. And I mean, if you don't go, you're definitely not going to find it. So I would recommend going.
Cool. Thanks, Judson. How does, talking about the sort of lessons learned from other states and you know, how does Massachusetts stand out, and how can other markets kind of problems be avoided here? So what lessons do we learn from other markets that ultimately help Massachusetts further along in its legalization journey?
I guess I'll take this one since I still have the mic, and then I'll stop talking. But I mean, the biggest issue that I saw in California, which is obviously where I got involved, and it's unfortunate, we were just talking earlier about kind of what happened to herbal last year as an example, is the AR issue where people aren't paying their bills in California. It bubbled up. It took down one of the biggest distributors, or the biggest distributor in the state, being Herbal, which then affected a lot of the brands as they didn't get paid for millions of dollars of invoices. And now in California, for example, that the tax burden has gone to the retailers. A lot of them are just closing up shop, and there's no bankruptcy in cannabis, so that money is just gone and people are out. How that's related to Massachusetts, I think, is Massachusetts has a good market to hopefully prevent that. I mean, one, just learning from California, but also since there's kind of the rule of 3 where the retailers are limited to 3 stores, and also from what I've seen, there's a lot more vertically integrated groups, so it kind of makes it more of a partnership when you're selling your product into a competitive partner's stores. It's pretty hard to then stiff them on the bill for their product. So I think that structure does benefit Massachusetts, and I know there's things like Cannabis credit and groups that are starting to provide credit scoring in the industry. So I think just being selective and thoughtful about who you sell your product to, because as a salesperson myself, I mean, you want to get sales, but if you're not getting paid, it's not even worthless. It's actually a negative. So yeah, I think having the mindset of like being more strategic with your retail accounts, where in states early on, it was kind of just, hey, I want to be in every store out of the gate, and then you sold a bunch of products, didn't get paid, and that was just a giant loss that unfortunately has tanked a lot of businesses.
Charmaine, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, so also having come from California, I gotta tell you, when I was told that I'd be spending a lot of time in Massachusetts, I got really excited because I am so hopeful and excited that I don't think you guys are gonna make the same mistakes California did. But for the record, why don't I just talk about a few of them so we make sure we don't fall into that trap. I wanna unpack a little bit about when the tax was moved from distributors to retailers in California and why that was a really huge explosive problem. So when we sell weed, obviously the tax used to be paid out by the distros, but I want to say a year or so ago they moved it to the retailers. And why that became such an issue was because the retailer didn't have to pay it till later. They were using, it was essentially, they were getting financing. And so the state yanked it. And then retailers couldn't pay their bills. They couldn't make payroll. And then there was just this huge domino effect. And then the brands couldn't, keep afloat, et cetera. And it was really, really sad. Like, we both know the founders of Herbal, really great, smart guys. And this whole thing just took them out, I guess. And so I think there was that piece that was troubling. I think also, as we all know, the black market in California continues to thrive really strongly. And when you have overtaxation of legal operators and very lenient penalties, $500 fines when you're caught, with an unlicensed shop, it's just exacerbating the issue. So of course, I'm hoping that we never fall into that world where you're encouraging the black market over licensed operators. And then I would just really reiterate this huge debt bubble that exploded in California. You saw a lot of groups, great groups, just collapse. And my hope is that we all do it right here. And, rising tides lift all ships. And so let's not make those same mistakes.
Megan, you want to add some?
Yeah, obviously the stuff I'm paying attention to is more around testing regulations and safety. The testing regulations state by state tend to get stricter, not looser. They tend to add requirements, not take them away. I do think in Massachusetts we have some overly strict requirements and we are advocating for loosening them, but that isn't the trend that we see across the country. The other thing I pay attention to a lot are the lawsuits and the recalls and the licenses that get revoked, because there are a lot of labs out there who are willing to skirt the rules or are pay for play or don't have good documentation and good records so that their results aren't defensible. And so if a brand has a recall or if they get sued and they focus the attention back on the lab, it crumbles there. And so I think the trend, hopefully moving to Massachusetts, is that if you know you have moldy product and you're going to a lab that's helping you out a little bit too much, that's not going to fly anymore. And we're going to start seeing the recalls and the lawsuits here too.
Matt or Randy, you have anything to add on that topic?
I'll say something. Access. I mean, anything you can do to get access, whether it be more retail. In California, I was in California. I got burned by Herbal. I was one of the brands. But anyways, one thing that came out of California that I really appreciated, and as a lesson learned, is that the access there, it's everywhere. And it's totally normalized. And like there's on-site consumption, there's on-premise. I was in the beverage space. So beverage on-premise is like really where it shines. That's where it's social. You can't smoke everywhere necessarily, so that's where that can come in. But being able to witness that and seeing the kind of paradigm shift in how people socialize with a beverage and cannabis's role in that, in part, was huge to see. So I'm a big advocate for access, and then also just aligning internally within the industry amongst your peers and colleagues to make sure that you're advocating for yourself, and you're the one kind of creating the rules, right, with the regulators. They need our input. So become an advocate, get out there, voice your opinions, right? Wrong or right.
Vocal,
be visible and vocal. You got to, or else nobody's going to do it for you, right?
Correct. So we're almost out of time here. Let's wrap this up with one final question. Looking at all these evolving trends as a whole, what's from your perspective the most positive outcome that can result from these evolving trends from your perspective? Let's go down the line.
I think safety, as it becomes more normalized, regulations they're gonna get to where they need to be. I think normalization, socialization is gonna benefit the safety, reduce the risk and hazard. In tobacco, I hate to say this, but the literature is quite demonstrative in the reduction of risk and harm in vape versus combusted products or burn products. I think you're going to see the same thing in cannabis. Not that smoking flower is bad for you, but hitting a vape will be demonstratively less risk and harm over a lifetime. That data is still very new and but we're starting to see the same thing. So I think that as this experiment goes on, we will see that risk and harm and safety is going to become just better overall.
Matt.
On the commerce side, the debt bubble and the passing of funds between all of these different entities is definitely the primary narrative in what's going on in this space, and we're going to see it resolve both directions. There's going to be players who move forward and correct their courses, and there's going to be players who don't survive, but I think what it's taking us all to is that we need to be, like Charmaine alluded to, selective with partnership, and we all are going to see ourselves over the next couple of years going deeper on partnerships instead of wider, and understanding that there are a lot of players in the space that aren't ready to play or haven't done it so far.
I'm optimistic about safety. I'm optimistic about labels heading in the direction where you can trust the numbers that are on them, and that consumers can buy product on retail shelves and know that it's going to be reliably safer than what they could get on the black market. I'm optimistic about the companies that are doing it right and the companies that care about quality being rewarded and lasting in the long run. And we all can't survive in this space, so I'm hopeful that the companies that leave are the ones that weren't doing it right or didn't believe in quality in the first place.
I think one of the biggest trends to focus on, I mentioned at the start, is kind of what's going on with hemp and what will happen with the Farm Bill at the end of the year. Related to kind of cannabis as more of an ingredient, if the Farm Bill stays as is, I mean, I think everyone should definitely consider adding a hemp line to it, as it obviously makes things easier to sell and just more financially viable to the industry. If that doesn't pass, then that's a huge benefit to operators that are in the regulated markets, and it shuts all of that down. So I'd say that's a big thing to focus on. And then also just from the rescheduling news, I think, again, the removal of 280E and just what that does to the profitability of companies should help kind of rise the tides across the industry, and then hopefully solve, this debt bubble that has happened in California, prevent that from happening in other states, and kind of more of the federalization, I guess, of the industry, having worked in a bunch of different states. I mean, eventually that will come to an end to some degree. I think states will have their own regulations, clearly. But just again, this Farm Bill, for example, that could negate a lot of these regulations that state by states have put in on the hemp side of things. So you have to definitely be cognizant of what's happening at a national level versus just thinking it will be, each state is kind of their own individual market forever.
For me, I think I'm anticipating more and more M&A activity in the space. And if it doesn't materialize as a full-blown M&A, I think you're going to see a lot tighter partnerships between retail and third-party brands. I think the brands that obviously have a great product, keep it in stock consistently, at an affordable price, and work great with retail are going to win. That's certainly what I'm hoping to be with our brands, but also certainly what we look for with the brands that we carry in our stores.
Awesome. I think we're out of time. Thank our panelists, Randy, Matt, Megan, Judson, Charmaine. Thank you. Thank you.